Paul is getting into this idea that he's called by the will of God. And essentially what he wants to start out by saying is that Paul is framing it as everything that I'm saying, that God is the one, God called me to do this. The authority that I'm about to have to exercise is not my own.
Right.
That this is God's authority, that he has kletos, he has called me out. I have been separated from the rest of the church to do this mission. And so everything I'm about to say is tied into, Paul is saying it, but God is the one. It's because of God's will, God's hope for my life. And then he says this word. He says, called by the will of God to be an apostle. So Paul is saying, I'm an apostle.
So what is that? What is an apostle? What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a word that gets thrown around quite a bit.
Yeah.
In fact, even more, probably in the last 10 or 15 years, really since the early 2000s, apostleship has kind of taken on a new thing. Because in early 2000, Pentecostal charismatic scholar named Peter Wagner basically prophesied that the office of prophet and apostle had been lost and it was being restored. And so the reason that word may sound like, where did that word come from all of a sudden?
Yeah.
It gets thrown around. I'm an apostle of this, I'm an apostle of that. There's this whole thing called the New Apostolic Reformation, the Apostolic Church, where. So no one talks about being an apostle more than Paul. And when I say no one, I mean no one ever. Not just no one in the Bible. No one in all of human history used the word more in written literature than Paul. Okay? The few times that it's used out of the Bible, it's typically used for like a seafaring messenger, right? So
Really?
basically
Okay,
a
I didn't know
mailman.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sending you to go address my affairs in another country, and I'm going to send you by boat. So ambassador would kind of be another way, a representative, that type of thing. It's literally the one who is sent from someone. So that's apostle, right? One who is sent from someone. So when Paul uses the word, he uses it kind of in two major ways. He uses it in kind of that everyday sort of sense, like, hey, we have messengers. And oftentimes when he's using it that way, your English Bibles will translate it as messenger. They won't even use the word apostle.
But it's the same Greek word.
It's the same Greek word,
translated
apostolos,
different. Okay.
right? Yeah, apostolos, apostoloi, that kind of thing. So they'll use that word, but they'll translate it messenger. But when the spiritual authority comes with it, then they'll use apostle, okay? Because there's also, Paul will also use it to say, there are people whom God has sent. And because they've been sent by God, Paul, called by the will of God to be an apostle, I am sent, therefore I carry a level of authority to oversee and to communicate God's will to churches and to other believers, okay? Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and in 1 Corinthians 15, he gets a lot more into like what made him an apostle, so we can't spend too much time because we'll get there eventually. But Paul's apostleship, it's critical, is rooted, all apostles, is rooted not necessarily in his own authority. That's critical. Apostleship's authority was rooted in their relationship to the one sending them, okay? So an apostle only had authority because it was sent by someone with real authority, if that makes sense. So Paul, when he's saying, I'm called by the will of God to be an apostle, he said, I'm not calling myself an apostle. God sent me as an apostle. Jesus actually used the term a little bit also when he talked about being sent. As the Father sent me, so I send you. It's the same sort of word that he's playing with. So this idea comes from that. Now, Paul was not from Israel. He was from Syria. He was much more, the word is Hellenized. He was much more Greeky. He was, I guess that's
an official word.
Right, yeah. He was way more Greeky than everyone else. But even in ancient Judaism, there was a concept called the Sha'ilah, who was an ambassador who would go and take care of someone's affairs. So if you were a landowner, you were a businessman, and you needed to take care of your affairs, you would send your Shaliah to go and speak on your behalf. So Paul is saying, I'm that. So Paul has essentially taken this Greco-Judaistic concept of an authoritative, empowered ambassador, and he said, I'm like that. He didn't invent the term. We know that he's used it. Other people were called apostles before him. but he definitely dialed it in.